Yo, what's up everyone? Ready to dive into another awesome story? Before we start, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the new stuff coming up. And don't forget to comment on what stories you want to see next. Alright, let's get to it. Welcome to Chrono Life, a virtual reality game where only the strongest survive. Pretty much like the law of the jungle. GU logs into the game, only to get mocked by other players for his lack of experience, trash gear, and overall noob status. But when he upgrades his wooden stick to the max reinforcement level, plus 99, GU realizes he now has the power to split continents and wipe out entire armies with a single hit. Time to teach these idiots a lesson. Freedom, excitement, exploration, a whole new reality. The best fantasy VR game has just been released, Chrono Life. On his first time playing, the newbie gets publicly humiliated by a group he wanted to join. They call him a noob, saying they don't accept inexperienced players in their party. They also trash his gear and tell him to come back only when he upgrades his equipment to at least plus 11. Pissed off, the protagonist starts ranting about everything in the game. People around him start wondering what's up with the guy yelling to himself. Someone mentions that he's just frustrated because no one let him join their group, and soon enough, he becomes a joke. He keeps complaining that those guys don't know jack about the game's items, or how strong his sword actually is. He even spent a fortune on in-game purchases to get it. That's when a girl notices him and walks over. He asks who she is, and she says she wants him to join her party to go farming together. Suddenly, his whole opinion about the game changes. Now he's saying it's the best game ever. Which, to be fair, it totally is. Trust me. While exploring the forest, they start chatting about their items. She seems impressed. He then casually mentions that he actually took money from his parents yesterday and blew a ton of cash on in-game purchases. She asks how much he spent in total. He tells her not to freak out and then drops the number, 55,001, about $55, on the warrior starter pack, which came with his knight's two-handed sword. She compliments him, saying he's like a knight straight out of a fairy tale. And that's when the protagonist, absolutely losing it, starts picturing his whole future with her, kissing, proposing, getting married, and starting a family together. Just a little bit over the top, I'd say. They had finally arrived. He asked her where they were since they were in the middle of a forest, but at that moment, she suddenly stabbed her staff into his stomach. Shocked, he asked why she did that, and if she was after his weapon. She just laughed, mocking him, saying she didn't need a crappy weapon like that. Then she told him that from the very start, she only lured him there to kill him, bringing him to the center of the forest where no one was around. Devastated, he asked if she had been lying about wanting to farm together too. She just shrugged and said there was no point in lying. He was just a noob anyway. She kept going, saying she bet he was a loser in real life too. Then she added that she'd make sure to never see him again, and told him to go take more money from his parents to reinforce his trash weapons. If he sucked at the controls, the least he could do was have decent gear. She even remembered him saying he got the starter pack and figured that must mean his parents were broke losers too. The protagonist stood up, furious, and told her to shut up and keep his parents' names out of her mouth. But before he could finish, she sliced him in half with her staff, saying he shouldn't talk to her like that. Right after that, a message popped up saying she had completed her mission and would now advance to a secret class. Her appearance completely changed. She now looked like an angel. This class was called Goddess of Life. To achieve it, she had to kill 1,000 players. As she left, she mentioned she had just one more mission to finish. That day, the protagonist learned one thing. In this game, only the strong survive. Then, a warning message appeared, saying his character had died and lost a portion of his experience. He would be revived in a safe zone. When he respawned, he remembered everything the girl had said to him, as well as the people who had mocked him at the start of the game. Fueled by sudden rage, he pulled out a hammer from his inventory, one that allowed him to enhance his weapons. He started reinforcing his sword, but then a message appeared. Reinforcement failed. His weapon shattered into pieces. Frustrated, he tried the same with his gloves. Another failure. Consumed by endless fury, he kept doing it with every piece of his gear until he was left with nothing. Just as he was about to log out in defeat, a small branch fell beside him. A child, who seemed to be the one who dropped it, looked at him. Frustrated that even newbies pitied him now, he angrily struck the stick with his reinforcement hammer. This time, it succeeded. So he kept going tirelessly until the reinforcement level maxed out. A notification appeared, telling him he had reached the highest possible enhancement level for the item. He was stunned. This didn't make any sense. After plus 10, the success rate for reinforcement was less than 5%. Honestly, this game had some top-tier balance. Then, the stick slipped from his hands and fell to the ground. The moment it hit, the entire area was obliterated, leaving behind massive destruction, even causing a crack to form on the planet itself. Everyone nearby panicked, thinking a dragon had caused the devastation. Many speculated it was some kind of surprise in-game event. The entire continent felt the impact of that one stick. That day, a new world record was set in the history of virtual reality games. The protagonist received another in-game notification stating that he had assassinated another player, causing his reputation to drop. He quickly remembered the people who had humiliated him. Now it was his turn for revenge. In real life, he was nobody. He wasn't particularly handsome or tall, his grades weren't great, and he didn't stand out in sports either. If he had to classify himself using gaming terms, he'd be about a bronze. For that is a little bit sad, but he is basically a loser, in other words. While walking through the village in the game, a man stopped him, threatening him for being a newbie walking in front of him. The woman beside him laughed at the situation and told him to stop, saying he was scaring the kid. The protagonist called him fat and told him to let go. Then, he touched the man's head with his stick. The man, furious at his attempt to fight using a wooden stick, scoffed, but the next moment, his face was completely obliterated by the stick's colossal power, making him evaporate. Confident in himself, the protagonist claimed that he was now the main character of that world. However, right after, he received a game notification stating that his weapon had been gravely damaged and would soon break. His stick had 3/5 durability left and could not be repaired, leaving him in shock. Poor people never get a break. He was extremely frustrated. He realized that since the stick originally had a total durability of 5, and he had already used it twice, it had now dropped to 3. That meant he only had 2 more uses left before his weapon would shatter. Still, he wasn't discouraged. He was thirsty for revenge, and said that the remaining uses would be enough. Upon arriving at the Ravine of the Dead, a massive tremor struck, and a gigantic 2-headed dragon appeared. The dragon spoke, "For a mere mortal, you are quite courageous." That was the strongest monster in the game, the twin-headed dragon, Urus. As the beast threatened him, the protagonist made a simple movement with his stick, instantly destroying one of its heads. Now, he was determined to use one of his last attacks to kill the strongest boss in the game. The dragon, shocked, quickly spoke. "Wait! Listen to what I have to say." The protagonist was furious. "Just now, you were calling me a mere mortal, and now you want to be all polite?" The monster defended itself. "I was just following the script." Then, the dragon asked, "Who are you? How are you this strong?" The protagonist replied, "I don't know. Just shut up and die." And with that, he destroyed the dragon's body. As he complained about his weapon's low durability, the dragon's last remaining head took the opportunity to speak. "If durability is your problem, I definitely have a solution for you." Then, a new game notification appeared. A contract request has been sent. Urus wishes to offer his soul. The game asked if he accepted. The protagonist was confused and asked what that meant. The dragon then questioned, "Have you ever heard of an ego's sword?" He said no. The dragon continued, "It's a long and complicated story." The protagonist cut him off. "Summarize it." The dragon sighed. "Basically, I'll become your sword. I'll abandon my physical form, leaving only my soul, which will make the weapon have infinite durability. This sword is the highest ranking weapon in the entire game." The protagonist laughed at the situation. A plot twist like this? I had given up on revenge, but it seems like the heavens are begging me to go through with it. And so, he accepted the contract with the dragon. Now he has a stick with highest level and granting it infinite durability. The monster's minions rose up, declaring they would avenge their master, but all were easily defeated. A 10 billion gold bounty, approximately $8 million, was placed on the protagonist's head. His wanted poster had been distributed worldwide, All 12 kingdoms across the 3 continents had received the news. The strongest guilds in the game, composed of the most powerful players, raised their banners with a common goal. For the first time ever, the 5 top guilds had joined forces. The leader of the World Guild Alliance took command and gave his orders. The guilds would work together to capture the fugitive player, officially declaring war against the criminal. As the protagonist walked through a narrow alley, he had a small moment of happiness for obtaining the weapon of his dreams. Then, a purple head suddenly appeared on his staff. Startled, he asked who it was. The head immediately responded, it was Urus. As he had mentioned before, his soul was now inside the weapon, meaning he had become its spirit. The protagonist asked how he just popped out of nowhere in his weapon. The dragon explained that this was the main feature of ego-rank weapons. Only the wielder could see and hear him. The protagonist then asked where his second head was. Looking around, the protagonist saw thousands of wanted posters plastered all over the village walls. His own head was now worth a bounty. He had become the most wanted criminal in the game. What a crazy turn of events, huh? The dragon spirit spoke to him. You must be really strong, having killed 800,000 people with a single attack. That's something even I couldn't have imagined. And let's not forget that 10 billion gold bounty. That's just insane. The protagonist questioned him. Aren't you just an AI character? Should you really be talking about real-world money like that? I thought NPCs weren't supposed to mention things outside the game. Urus replied. I'm already dead anyway, so I don't really care about those details. Then he asked, so what are you going to do about this situation? With such a massive bounty, every player in the game is going to hunt you down. Maybe you should take advantage of this opportunity and wipe out humanity. The protagonist was still in shock over the absurd bounty amount, but convinced himself that it wasn't such a bad thing. Now, he felt like a celebrity. Since there was no turning back, he decided he would become a secretly overpowered person. The dragon asked what that meant. OP is a nickname for people with ridiculous strength, he explained. I'll still look like a noob, but I'll secretly have colossal power. Urus asked how he planned to hide his strength. Humans always look down on opponents who seem weak. The protagonist said that Urus had a lot to learn. That was the fun of it all. Then he asked, haven't you ever read a comic where the main character looks weak but has insane hidden powers? Then, an arrow was fired into the protagonist's back. The supreme commander of the 5 Guild Alliance, Hawkeye, had struck him. His soldiers marched forward, surrounding the protagonist with thousands of bows and arrows aimed at him. The commander sentenced him to imprisonment and confinement for having killed 800,000 players. The protagonist stood up, and as the soldiers charged at him with their spears, he turned to the dragon. Forget what I said earlier. He had planned to keep his powers a secret and live a peaceful life. But now, he had changed his mind. Raising his stick, he unleashed an explosion that wiped out the soldiers around him, and along with them, the capital of the first kingdom they were in. The commander quickly pulled an item from his inventory, the Link Orb. An item that could summon as many people as he wanted to his location. It cost 10 million gold. And he used it. A mass teleportation occurred. Suddenly, millions of soldiers and knights surrounded the protagonist. The World Guild Alliance had arrived, approximately 3 million members. The commander gave the order to attack. The protagonist raised his stick, and in an instant, a massive portion of them were wiped out. The dragon was shocked. Even though he had been the strongest boss monster in the game, even he couldn't handle millions of enemies at once. And these weren't just any enemies. These were the highest-ranking players in the world. Even if he had summoned all his minions, defeat would have been inevitable. The protagonist is inevitable. They attacked together. But one failure after another led to their defeat. The Mage Guild attempted to contain him, casting a summoning spell to drop a series of high-level incantations on him. But he simply raised his weapon again and repelled their magic. They tried another spell. The protagonist noticed and struck them down with his stick again. He had finally defeated every single one of them. It was 1 against 3 million. The commander lay on the ground, unable to believe what had just happened. The protagonist spoke. I'll let you live. The commander questioned him. Why? The protagonist smirked. Because you were the one who shot that arrow into my back. Then, the protagonist smashed his face with his stick. That day's battle became legend. Not just for the players of Chrono Life, but for gamers all over the world. Even people who knew nothing about games had heard of it. The dragon was in awe of what the protagonist had done, and praised him. The protagonist finally asked, Where the hell were you? What were you doing this whole time? Then, a woman approached him. The same one who had betrayed him at the start of the game. A reunion worth remembering, huh? The sun sets over the vast plains, countless scattered lances strewn across the ground, 3 million cold, dead bodies lay sprawled out, and finally, the protagonist had crossed paths with that girl again. In his mind, it was a scene straight out of an action movie. Remembering what she had said about her parents, anger began to swell within him, but all he could do was laugh. She asked how he had been and remarked that it was a coincidence they were seeing each other again in a place like this. He contradicted her, saying that she had clearly come looking for him, and she questioned whether that was really how it appeared. The protagonist confessed that at that moment he only wanted to crush her skeleton, but since they were talking, he asked about her hair change and whether she had dyed it. She said she was glad he noticed and that after she had killed, she had advanced in class, and once she did that, the color of her hair changed suddenly. The protagonist asked about her becoming the goddess of life after killing 1,000 players, and suggested that she should actually be called the goddess of death. She admitted it was a really funny thing, and then he charged at her, but without success in finishing her off. She appeared behind him, saying she still had a lot to tell him, and he continued attacking without stopping, yet still had no effect on her. She was impressed and said he had gotten much stronger than before, but it still wasn't enough to kill her. He commented that he found it strange because he knew she had been hit by his attack. It didn't make sense for her to still be standing without a scratch. She replied that she had now become a goddess, and no human could kill her, which only irritated him further, making him charge at her again. Another flurry of attacks occurred, but still with no effect. She then spread her wings and claimed to be sure that he hadn't stopped thinking about her since the day they met, and that his desire to kill her was immense. She continued, asking him to give up, saying it didn't matter how many times he tried. No matter how strong he became, he would never be able to kill her. He then turned his back on her and began to walk away. She questioned where he was going, and he said that this time he would attack with all his power. She asked if he hadn't heard her explanation, but he justified that he wasn't going to kill her, but rather destroy the entire planet, since he couldn't defeat her directly. So that was his only way out. She questioned whether he believed a mere human could do such a thing, and he reaffirmed that this time he would go with all his power, that until now he hadn't even used half of it, and she began to take it seriously. The goddess said that if he destroyed the planet, he would also end up dead, and that wouldn't be revenge but rather suicide. She asked if he would go so far just to satisfy his desire for revenge, commenting that his previous death was only the price of ignorance. He started laughing, remembering that only the strongest survive, and told her to listen now. He claimed it was time to teach her a lesson. There were always trolls, like her, who didn't seem to understand how things worked. He then raised his stick and said he had nothing to lose, and she shouldn't mess with someone who had nothing to lose. She then asked him to wait, but it was too late, and he directed his attack with all his strength to the ground, causing the complete destruction of the planet, turning it into cosmic dust. That was the end of the sweet times. At that moment, back in the real world, many people who were at a virtual reality arcade began to complain that they had been kicked out of the game, asking the manager what was going on and whether he had cut the power. He asked everyone to calm down, and they all concluded that the game server had probably crashed. They wondered if there was any reason for this. When they checked their phones, they saw that the game's website had posted an announcement claiming they had to perform emergency maintenance on the server and apologize for interrupting their gameplay, stating they would provide an update as soon as possible. A player count list appeared on what remained of the server, showing that only one player was left. The protagonist, lost among the binary codes, didn't know where he was, but while he was asking himself questions, someone said ST-389. That was the name of the planet he had destroyed, famous even in the fourth universe for its beauty. The person asked why he had done that, and a mysterious voice said that planet was his mother's favorite place. The protagonist asked who he was, and the guy started laughing maniacally. Joker vibes. That person referred to himself as a god. The protagonist replied that he didn't care who or what he was, and asked if he had seen a girl with black hair around. He denied it, saying that only the two of them were left, and asked why the protagonist was so shocked since he was the one who had killed everyone there. He prompted him to reflect on the chances of surviving a global explosion. The protagonist interrupted, laughing, happy with his revenge, and called out to Urus to celebrate, but got no response. The mysterious person said it was just the two of them in that room, which meant his little friend had also died. The protagonist then asked why he was there too, since it only showed one player online, and questioned if he was an NPC or an admin. The person denied being either, and when he tried to reveal himself, he mentioned that someone was interrupting him. He said he had to leave, and that their meeting that day had a good reason behind it, bidding farewell, and asking the protagonist to say hi to the hairy man for him before disappearing. The protagonist was then disconnected from the game and questioned why that person had appeared and left so suddenly, wondering who the hairy man was that had been mentioned earlier. He finally got disconnected from the spot where he had been playing. Upon exiting his gaming capsule, he found a man accompanied by 3 security guards in front of him. This mysterious guy called out his name, talked about his age, and commented that he had been playing the game for 3 months, and that his current weapon was a plus 99 wooden stick. After all these comments, the man asked if it was really him, and the protagonist confirmed, asking who he was too. He replied that he was the man there to take away his wooden stick. This guy took him out to dinner. The protagonist couldn't eat, and the man noticed, asking if something was wrong and telling him to eat something, mentioning that the woman who owned that restaurant made excellent food. He finally managed to eat something. The man said he used to go there whenever he didn't have money, which meant he had been going there for 15 years, since the first time he went to that place was when he opened the Chrono Life company during its early development stages. The protagonist soon realized who he was, and the man said he forgot to introduce himself, stating that he was Deokbi Choi, the CEO of Chrono Life. The legend himself. The protagonist was shocked by this revelation, as he thought he was dealing with a gang leader. He quickly asked who the men in suits with him were, and the man replied that they were the people who worked on the game. The protagonist then inquired what the CEO of that game wanted with him. The man responded that he had already mentioned this at the arcade. He was there to confiscate his wooden stick. Noticing the protagonist's shock, he asked why he hadn't expected that since the item was abnormal and needed to be removed. Still surprised by the revelations, the protagonist commented that it didn't make sense since he had reinforced it by himself. The man explained that once he reached the plus 10 reinforcement level, the success rate for the next level would be 3%, and that percentage only continued to rise. So, it didn't make sense that he had succeeded with such a low percentage unless it was a bug, and now they were going to confiscate his item. Meanwhile, some players in the virtual game were gathered in a group to kill a monster. The group's mage hit it with a strong fire spell, and the knight congratulated her for hitting it right on target. They just needed one more good attack. Then, another person in the group charged at the monster with bare hands, but the creature flung them away, causing them to crash down onto the mage. The protagonist watched the group from a distance. Now he was back in the game with his stick and Urus. During the earlier conversation with the game's CEO, he confessed that the removal of his stick was solely the company's wish, but he had a different idea. After doing some studying, he realized it was a normal item and not a bug, so they decided not to interfere with players anymore since the events were the players' own choices. While he was enjoying a soup, he mentioned that he liked to add special sauce to it, and had the freedom to do so if he wanted. He wanted to give him the same sense of freedom while playing, but at that moment, the restaurant owner appeared, complaining about him putting that sauce in the soup and hitting him on the back of the neck. That's one way to spice up a meal. Back to the players fighting the monster, the group now gathered to complain about the fighter, who had rushed in without thinking, claiming she knew she had to hold her position during team battles. They all joined forces to kick her out of the group. Earlier, the CEO confessed that he had only one request. He truly believed they had done a great job turning Chrono Life into a fun game. It was an epic fantasy world that everyone dreamed of visiting at least once in their lifetime. He then proposed to the protagonist to stop destroying things and just enjoy the game, to have fun with the true purpose of the game. Just the basics. In the game again, the knight of the group spat at the fighter they had expelled, and they left the area. Seeing that, the protagonist declared that he would do things his way from now on. He then tried to use the power of his stick, but was startled when the fighter yelled, complaining about the game. Coincidentally, she used the same arguments he had in his first playthrough, creating a connection between them. As she left to farm alone, just as he had suggested, the monster group they had attacked earlier gathered again. At that moment, the protagonist, wearing only underwear and a cape, jumped in front of her and defeated them with the power of his stick. For the first time in that game, he felt a bit of fun and asked her if she wanted to join his group. Talk about a heroic entrance. She denied him, raising her middle finger and claiming she wouldn't play with noobs before walking away. News of his feats in that game was still reverberating around the world, with many questioning whether he was just a hacker since it didn't make logical sense to kill 3 million people alone. Most of them called for him to be banned, claiming he was probably cheating. The game's website then issued a statement saying that the player they were reporting was completely normal. After an investigation, they discovered that he hadn't done anything wrong during the game, which left everyone shocked. People inside the game were discussing how the game server had been taken down because of that guy, who apparently had killed many players at once. Many disbelieved it was possible, but most said it was true. Many of them wanted to see what he looked like in the game, but couldn't because of his hooded cloak. A classic disguise, but apparently effective. The protagonist was still following that fighter, and she got annoyed by it. When she questioned him about it, he replied that he was just going to farm with her. She reinforced her argument again, calling him a noob since he wasn't wearing any appropriate gear and had only a wooden stick. She said she didn't have time to waste on losers like him. He questioned her, still not believing she thought he was weak since he had saved her from the group of monsters earlier. However, Urus intervened, saying that during the attack, she had her eyes closed, so she probably didn't see what he did. He felt happy to hear that since he could maintain his status of anonymity. He then approached her and asked for help, saying he didn't know much about the game and was a newbie. He tried to convince her by calling her a professional at what she did. Urus asked what he was doing, and he confessed he was pretending to be weak. The girl became so full of herself that she said, as a professional, it was her responsibility to help other players, and then invited him to her group. Pure humility. The two entered a dungeon together. The girl struck the monsters present with her special gloves, defeating them easily. With her skills, she managed to take down all 4 at the same time, still full of herself for being called a professional. The protagonist sat back and watched the fight, commenting to Urus that she seemed strong since even fighting low-level monsters could be dangerous when taking on several at once like she was. Noticing he was just sitting there doing nothing, she got irritated and walked over to complain, telling him to at least try to help her with his stick. He tried to play the pity card, saying his stick wouldn't do anything to monsters that size. However, she said if he wanted to get stronger faster, he needed to fight too and questioned whether he wanted to remain a noob forever. The girl received a message notifying her that there were 10 minutes left until she had to log off, urging her to wrap up her game and hurry. She then informed him that she needed to step out for a bit, saying she'd be back in 30 minutes, and asked him to at least fight some monsters until she returned. The prota said to Urus that he wanted to know how she made a living, still unable to believe she had spent 100 million won, about $8,000, on a game like that. Urus replied that she probably came from a wealthy family. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy virtual weapons. When she logged off from the game, she was in a room, and remembering the protagonist walking alongside her and complimenting her made her smile like a goofball. Just then, a woman entered her room, asking what was wrong with her, apparently very angry because she was still in bed playing. She questioned whether she wanted to ruin her career, which sparked a discussion, but it quickly ended since she only had 10 minutes to get ready. The woman helped her with the preparations, fixing her hair and putting on makeup. Such a sweetheart, at least sometimes. The next presentation was the music festival, and the star attraction had held the #1 spot on social media for 13 weeks. She was a super idol and the most talented songwriter of her age, and then she entered, Sarung Han. The audience went wild when she appeared. However, this super idol had a hobby that probably most of the audience had no idea about: online gaming. The protagonist was still in the dungeon and declared it was time to practice a bit while she was away. He then began training, focusing on killing as many monsters as possible with just one hit. Overkill is just his style. The idol was 17 and attending high school. She had entered the music industry at a young age, and, after a long time without recognition for her talents, she was now the hottest star of the moment. During an interview, she reached the impressive milestone of 14 weeks at number 1. The interviewer congratulated her on the achievement, saying it was quite a feat, and commented that the way she wrote her songs had a significant impact on people because her lyrics felt very genuine. He asked her how it was to deal with that after gaining fame. She responded that she enjoyed spending a lot of time alone at home, usually reading poetry or fairy tales in her free time. The interviewer continued, noting that besides her music career, she was also famous for her acting career, and he had heard she was cast in a new drama called Dirty Mouth Teen. She confirmed, saying she was very excited to start the new project. What a peculiar drama title, right? The idol returned to the virtual world and began lecturing the protagonist, pushing him to train much harder. She used games to relieve stress from her daily life. Urus asked the protagonist why he didn't just escape this situation, and he replied that he was still trying to maintain his secret identity and needed to pretend to be weak. As they walked through the cave, she asked if he had killed any monsters while she was gone. She then asked him to put it into practice now, but before they started she asked for his name. She interrupted him, saying she would call him Panty. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, a mysterious group was following them, claiming they had finally found her. One of the mysterious figures asked the leader what they should do now, and he replied that justice would be served today. When they found the monster in the cave, she ordered the protagonist to charge at it, which he did. When he went to strike the monster, he lightly tapped his stick on its head, causing it to explode. She was thrilled with his achievement, saying he had really gotten stronger. However, at that moment, a spear was thrown toward them. She grabbed him by the shirt and diverted the spear's trajectory, then kicked it back, hitting the face of the mysterious group's leader. Talk about a plot twist. The mysterious figure complimented her and suggested she should be very grateful for the equipment she had. She asked who he was, and he asked again if she had forgotten his voice, which made him sad. They were members of the Hallison Guild, and it had been a while since they had last met. The leader then ordered everyone to advance on them. The girl told the protagonist to fall back, claiming that things would get dangerous from here on out. She stood her ground and managed to take down one of the advancing members, using her special ability to take out a large number of them. Then everyone charged in at once to try to defeat her. It wasn't the first time this group had attacked them, nor was it the first time they had lost. The man who seemed to be the leader refused to give up and always returned to seek revenge. At least that's what the protagonist believed. The most important thing was that everyone seemed weak. When she defeated them all, the leader stood up, accompanied by a woman, and said that everything was going according to plan. Now that she was off guard, he instructed the woman to move in. As she approached the girl, she extended her hand and activated a skill called Steal, making the girl's special gloves disappear and land in the hands of the mysterious woman. She commented that they were of very high quality and asked if she was rich or something. The protagonist was impressed with the skill she used, and Urus was also surprised, stating that it wasn't normal for that skill to be so strong. He felt at ease, claiming that there was nothing to steal from him. He only had his underwear and a cape. However, he remembered his wooden stick and clutched it tightly, running away. The leader told the woman to ignore him, as he seemed to be a novice player with little experience and likely not much good equipment. She became intrigued by him and tossed the girl's gloves to the leader, saying it would be more fun to steal from the poor. Then she advanced toward him, asking where he was going, and pointed her hand at him. In that moment, he attempted to attack with his stick, but she was quicker and managed to steal it from him. But when she took his weapon, Urus's spirit activated, haunting her by calling her an arrogant human and questioning how she dared to steal from him. She threw the stick to the ground in fear, and the protagonist retrieved his weapon. The spirit took on its peaceful form, visible only to the protagonist, showing that it was furious for having been robbed. He calmed it down. The woman was still dazed by what had happened, questioning whether it was an illusion, but she knew it felt too real to just be a trick of the mind. The leader asked what she was doing on the ground, questioning if she had forgotten her job. She quickly got back up, claiming to be a mercenary who only worked for money. However, with her guard down, the girl attacked from behind, intending to retrieve her gloves. The mercenary said she didn't have them anymore and pointed to the leader, who was holding them. The protagonist then knocked her out by lightly tapping his stick on her head and set his plan in motion to defeat everyone without them knowing he was strong. He took them all down with a single hit from his stick, as always. The mercenary was shocked by this, and he took her down too. The protagonist said he had been very patient since meeting the girl, and that mercenary had ruined the rest of what he had. He then proceeded to destroy the entire cave with another swing of his stick. Talk about making an exit. The girl woke up startled, finding the protagonist sitting behind her in a tree, eating. He noticed she was finally awake. She asked where they were, and what had happened to the people who had attacked them. He replied that they were long gone, and had left some time ago. She questioned why they had left, and why she had been knocked out, only waking up now. He then returned her gloves, and asked her to tell him everything she knew about the guild. She asked when he had become so confident, but since it was her fault he got attacked, she decided to share. She asked if he knew what the ancient lineage was. He didn't understand, but Urus explained that it referred to when an old guy played this game. The protagonist asked Urus how he knew that being just an NPC, and Urus replied that he had researched it on Wikipedia. He then launched into a long explanation about what it meant, but when he noticed the lost expression on the protagonist's face, the girl clarified that it was a type of player who spent billions of won in the game. This was the main characteristic of such players, and all the members of that guild that attacked them were part of this group. The girl explained that she had randomly crossed paths with them a few months back, and since then, that guild had been following her constantly. But they weren't just old men. They didn't know much about the game, which was why she was able to win all the confrontations. Finally, she asked how he had gotten her gloves back, and if he had stolen them back from them. He answered that they had just been left behind. She didn't quite understand, but said she was sure they would return. The protagonist mentioned that something still felt off about the story. He didn't understand why they wanted to steal her gloves so badly. She replied that it was because they cost 10 million gold. He retorted that's why it was strange. These people were used to spending, so theoretically, there was no reason to try to steal something that cost millions. There had to be another reason behind it. Inside the Hallis and Guild's base, the previous leader received a blow to his stomach from another person and knelt, begging for forgiveness from his boss, and pleading for another chance. The man told him to shut up, claiming there was no time to waste, and asserted that one of the other 4 guardians would take this mission in his place. Others entered the room, mocking him for failing to complete such an easy mission, questioning how this man was even one of them, using the argument that he was a poor guy who only spent 100 million won. Another suggested he should be expelled, and the failure to do so resulted in the mission's failure. One remained silent, while one of them advised the fallen man to think bigger and question the mercenary he had hired, already expecting him to be defeated for hiring someone so cheap. The silent one then offered to complete the mission in his place. He was confident, claiming he would bring back what he was asked for before lunch. The chief started to laugh, telling them to begin the mission, and asking them to show the true fear that their guild carried. The protagonist was hiding in the room, and suddenly appeared, laughing at all of them and calling them ridiculous. He found it even funnier the names they used. The chief asked who he was, and how he had gotten in there. The protagonist replied that he would leave that for their imaginations to answer. He then said that if they continued to go after their boss, it would make his job of hiding his powers a bit more difficult, and questioned if they knew how hard it would be for him to come up with another excuse. He mocked them again for calling themselves the 4 guardians, and asked them not to prolong the story, claiming he would finish it quickly. The chief insisted that he didn't know what he was getting into, and ordered everyone to kill him. As they advanced towards him, wielding armor and weapons that probably cost billions, the protagonist remained calm, just waiting for his moment to strike with his stick. A mysterious figure was walking towards the cabin they were in, humming a tune while the guild members were being defeated by a man wielding nothing but a simple stick, wearing only a pair of underwear and a cape. As she got closer, he delivered more blows to everyone present. Finally, with a powerful swing of his stick, he destroyed the cabin by striking the ground, using a bit of his total strength. The mysterious person approaching the cabin revealed herself to be a girl, who was very surprised by the destruction of the cabin so quickly. This girl soon revealed herself to be the goddess of healing, who had fought against the protagonist shortly before he had destroyed the entire world of the game with just one blow. Enjoying the story so far? Then leave a like to show some love and comment on what you think. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next amazing stories. Even after the sequence of attacks and the explosion, the chief had survived. As soon as he got up from the rubble, he summoned all the members of the Halcyon Guild. When they arrived at the scene, the first thing they did was attack the protagonist. He simply took a deep breath and told them that if they wanted to kill him, they would need at least 3 million members. He raised his stick again and defeated them all. The guild leader was in a state of complete shock, unable to understand how all those members with good equipment were defeated so easily. Even the weakest and newest member had spent around 10 million on his items, and all of them together could still fight against the 5 best guilds. Yet, a simple stick was taking them all down simultaneously. As he tried to comprehend how this was possible, he was surprised when he remembered it was the man from the wanted poster he had seen throughout his entire game. He recalled his own history, from the first time he played an online game back in his second year of school. At that time, the games weren't as realistic as today's. There weren't as many quests or groups. All they did was farm to level up. Even that simple routine was a lot of fun. He used to be monitored by his parents to prevent him from playing all night. He still remembered spending weekends at the internet cafe with his friends all day just to level up. As time passed, he grew older, and with age came many responsibilities. Once he became an adult and started working, he had no time for anything outside his job. During his work hours, one of his employees entered his office holding an old computer. He worked harder than anyone he knew, so he wanted to reward himself with a bit of nostalgia. The employee asked why he had requested such an old computer, saying they could have used one of the new ones to play online. He explained it was all about the vibe. When he turned on the computer, his heart began to race. It felt like he was transported back to his childhood, like returning to his first love. But he wasn't the only one who had grown over time. After defeating all the guild members, the protagonist approached the chief and another surviving leader, questioning why they stole from others even when they had enough money. He then warned them it was time for the old men to take their licks. He raised his stick and pressed it against the chief's head, knocking him down, and declared that from that day forward, the guild was finished. He ordered them to stop going after the girl to make it easier for him to maintain his disguise, and began to leave the area. However, as he was exiting, the chief stood up and asked if he was the one who had annihilated all the members of the 5 best guilds in the world, 3 million players. He proceeded to ask how much money the protagonist had spent to achieve that level of power, certain that he must have used an exorbitant amount. The protagonist claimed he didn't know what he was talking about, but said he had spent a bargain on his money. The chief asked for the amount, imagining it could be trillions, and the protagonist replied that he spent 55,001 on the initial warrior package. Upon hearing this, the chief burst out laughing and asked the other leader how many games they had played besides the one they were currently in. When he replied that they had played 8, the chief affirmed that this one was their best, and things were starting to get truly interesting. The goddess, who had been listening quietly, agreed, saying that the game was the best of all. She then asked how their planned preparations were going. He responded that they were going well, but from now on, they would give up everything and would no longer cooperate with her. Upon hearing this, she raised her staff and split it in half. When she heard the other leader shout for his chief, she killed him too for being too loud. A notification appeared on the protagonist's screen, congratulating him for reaching the maximum level. He didn't quite understand what it meant and asked Eurus if he knew anything about it, allowing him to see his public stats. When they saw he was at level 999, they were in complete shock. Chrono Life was first in the number of online players at the same time, first in registered players, first in sales, and first in dissatisfaction, thus being named the best virtual reality game in the world. At least, that was the context provided by an interviewer while asking a professional player of the game, Faker, about being almost at the maximum level. He claimed it was impossible, Players around the world were trying day and night to achieve that feat, but so far, no one had succeeded. Even if all the professionals in the game farmed for 24 hours straight, it would likely take decades to reach that level. Urus's first reaction upon seeing the protagonist's maximum level was to comment that he had just become the first player in the world to reach the maximum level, feeling happy to realize that he truly had potential. The protagonist still couldn't believe it, since just a little while ago, he was at level 7. But it made a lot of sense. On the first day he picked up that stick, he had killed about 800,000 people, and not only that, he also defeated countless monsters in the dungeons of the world. Plus, he gained experience for defeating the strongest boss monster in Chrono Life, Urus, and for killing his legion, the strongest in the entire game. On top of that, he gained experience for taking out all the members of the Global Guild Alliance, which totaled around 3 million players, and finally, the destruction of the planet. That's how the first player reached the final level of the game. After receiving this message, another one popped up, stating that now that he had reached the maximum level, he would enter the Ascension plan. And just like that, he was teleported to another location. An idol was lying on a grassy field, gazing at the stars, complaining that she was getting really bored waiting for Calcinia. She remembered he had told her he would be back soon, and then said he only had 1 hour to return, or she would leave. It wasn't right for a professional like her to be kept waiting like that. The protagonist had been sent to ruins he had never seen before, and immediately started complaining about being dragged around against his will in this game. First, he had to meet that strange guy who claimed to be a god, and then he met the game CEO, Urus, who commented on how popular he had become. A mysterious voice greeted him, calling him a human pup, saying it didn't expect to receive someone so soon and praising his achievement. The figure revealed itself to be a kind of humanoid being with blue skin and multiple arms, wearing what seemed to be the best gear in the game. It welcomed the protagonist with open arms, declaring itself the god of classes, the guide of the ascended. Once again, it praised his journey so far, acknowledging that despite his setbacks, he had reached the maximum level as a beginner, which was admirable. Urus asked the protagonist if it was true that he was a newbie, to which he confirmed, explaining that he hadn't progressed in class advancements. Then, another message appeared, congratulating him and stating that he would advance to a secret class. The stones around him began to float toward him, and more messages started appearing, indicating that the souls of all the weapons in the game had entered his body. Being consecrated as the master of newbies, he was granted special benefits. All his stats would be reset, and he would now have 3 times the skill points he previously had to use, totaling 14,985 points. Urus was surprised by this, and the protagonist commented that he seemed more interested in those points than in his secret class. He explained that it was because he only earned 5 skill points per level up. So even if someone else reached the maximum level, their level would still technically be 3 times lower than his, and he asked how the protagonist could remain so calm. While Urus awaited a response, the protagonist allocated all the points he had gained into just one stat. The CEO of the game was in his office enjoying a cup of tea when one of his employees entered, alerting him that he needed to see something related to that player. He followed the employee to the office, where, upon looking at the computer, he noticed that the player had already reached the maximum level. However, the employee mentioned that this wasn't the problem and asked him to see what the protagonist was doing. When he looked, he started laughing, saying that the kid knew how to have fun. The employees in the room grew very concerned, stating that this was no laughing matter and that they should take some precautions. The CEO then asserted that they, as game developers, shouldn't dictate how their players would play, and he left the room, thinking that not even in his wildest dreams did he imagine the player would put all his points into that stat. He was pleased that, for the first time in history, they had a good example of both the best and worst player possible. The god told the protagonist that this was the last step of his journey with him, and that he would now have a decision to make. This decision was to select one of the ascended weapons he was holding. The protagonist was excited and began to decide which one to take, but then asked the god to give him all of them. The god refused, and the protagonist threatened to throw the weapons on the ground before he defeated him. Everyone was shocked by what he said, and the game sent a message notifying that he had angered the god of classes, and he had now become his enemy. The god, irritated by the situation, charged at the protagonist. However, he simply raised his stick and repelled the attack, stunning him. It was revealed that the stat he had allocated all his points to was called Constitution. The effects of this stat increased his health and regeneration, making him immune to negative effects. Urus realized he had made a huge mistake and had ruined his character. In this game, every piece of equipment had a certain weight, and since his class didn't focus on strength, he needed to increase his strength stats to equip those items. So, basically, he could equip nothing now except for the cloak and the stick, and the protagonist said that was all he needed. Another notification appeared, informing him that he had met all the requirements for a secret skill called Healing Factor, which allowed the user to recover from all damage received and made them immune to effects like poison and paralysis. The god recovered from the previous attack and fired a lightning bolt from his eyes at the protagonist. Urus, scared, asked if he was okay, but then he began to laugh, saying this was the best game of all time. He then started suffering a series of attacks from the entity, but since his regeneration skill was on another level, none of it had any effect on him. He thanked the god for teaching him many things and ordered him to drop the weapons again, but the god refused once more. The protagonist then killed him with his stick, destroying the ascension plan and being sent back to his original location. Now he had all the ascended weapons. While he was happy with his achievement, the idol appeared, emanating an aura of anger, asking how he could have made her wait so long. He appeared behind her, saying he was back, but was soon interrupted by a punch to his face. He tried to justify himself, saying he thought she had left. She, furious about the situation, decided to log out of the game, warning him that she would be back at 7:30 p.m., and it was best for him to be there exactly at that time. The protagonist then decided to log out of the game as well. It was almost midnight. As he walked home, he felt happy to have finished another gaming session, claiming it was the best game ever. He was thinking about the amount of money he could make by selling the ascended weapons he had acquired since he was the first person to get them, and could demand whatever price he wanted. Unfortunately, he remembered that these weapons were linked to his character, meaning he couldn't get rid of them. While walking, he passed by the restaurant he had visited before and remarked that he was hungry. When he checked his wallet, he realized he had nothing. He complained about being born poor and walked away. He then remembered the price of his friend's equipment in the game and imagined what would happen if he sold his game items to transfer the money to real life. With that thought, he dashed back to the arcade. Upon entering the game again, he promised himself that his days of being poor were over, and he began farming with his character. The protagonist started by defeating the strongest monsters in Urus's legion, easily collecting tons of expensive items. Urus praised him for defeating them all effortlessly, and the protagonist mentioned that he had just begun. Then the monsters respawned, and he quickly defeated them again. In the past, he had attended an interesting lecture at Harvard University about Bill Gates, the world-famous billionaire known as the creator of Microsoft. It was said that he made $150 per second, and this informative lecture sparked financial awareness in the protagonist. By the end of his farming session, he had amassed an immense pile of items, which he calculated would be worth approximately 15 billion won. It may have only been for a brief moment, but he managed to make more money than Bill Gates. The first place he visited in real life was a Gucci boutique, where he bought numerous luxury items. He then purchased a luxury car, and as he drove through the streets, people were impressed because they had never seen that model before. However, he still wasn't a good driver and crashed the car into a pole, but he quickly bought another one afterward. In a meeting at the game company, a graph showing the losses caused by the protagonist was presented to the CEO, and everyone was trying to figure out how to stop him from causing these problems. His phone rang, and when he answered, the protagonist asked how he was doing. He mentioned that he was going to spend his money, and was thinking about buying a gift for him, asking if he needed anything. All he got in response were insults, and the call was abruptly ended. At that moment, the protagonist's only problem was figuring out how to spend his money. Then he remembered the most important thing to do. He bought the most luxurious apartment he could find. He decided to go to his neighbor's apartment to offer a piece of cake, claiming he was celebrating. When the door opened, he came face to face with the most beautiful girl he had ever seen in his life, who coincidentally looked a lot like the girl he played with. However, neither of them recognized each other at that moment, and it went unnoticed. In the game, a humanoid figure appeared in the ruins of Urus, claiming to be his lost head, and vowing to eliminate all humans from the game. Back in the real world, the idol entered her apartment, and her manager asked who was at the door. She replied that it was the new neighbor offering a piece of cake, and called the gesture a bit cheesy. Still, the girl felt a strange sense of familiarity. She was sure she had seen the guy somewhere before. Her manager then told her to take off her school uniform because they had work to do. The idol questioned if she was just a money-making machine, since it had only been 30 minutes since she got back from school. Her manager responded that she could push it back if she wanted, but she figured she'd want to be done by 7:30 p.m. so she could get back to her game. Reluctantly, the idol agreed and got ready. When the protagonist logged back into the game, he realized that all the monsters he had been farming had disappeared. Confused, he asked Urus what had happened. Urus also found it strange since all the monsters in the game were programmed to respawn indefinitely. Then, the protagonist remembered he had to meet the girl at 7:30. It was then revealed that Urus's lost head had been absorbing every monster in its path. Eventually, it came across the goddess of life. When she tried to speak with it, the creature attacked her, attempting to absorb her as well. However, the game displayed an alert stating that the absorption had failed. She then appeared behind him, questioning how he dared to attack his own mother. Urakan, as the creature was now called, simply remarked that she smelled similar to him. Ignoring his comment, she advised him to head to the nearest village to feed. With that, Urakan set off toward the humans. When he arrived at the village, his impact caused a massive explosion. At the game's headquarters, the CEO was informed that they were being flooded with complaints, not just through customer support but on every social platform possible. Players were all reporting the same issue. They were being annihilated by a single monster with no way to defend themselves. The staff scrambled to apologize, calling it an unforeseen issue. Inside the game, the goddess of life stood beside Urakan, surprised that he had wiped out everyone in an instant. He stated that he needed more and asked if she knew a better place to feed. She replied that there was someone who could satisfy his hunger. At the meeting spot, the idol waited. The protagonist was already 13 minutes late. Sensing another presence, she assumed it was him, only to turn around and come face to face with Urakan, who was now level 999, while she was only level 24. The goddess stood alongside the creature and greeted the idol, addressing her by her game name, Love. The girl immediately asked if she knew the protagonist, as he was the only one who called her that from time to time. The woman speculated that they must be very close. Love then started talking to the monster, and a moment later, the creature attacked, absorbing her in an instant. After that, the two began to leave the area, but the protagonist suddenly appeared behind them, asking where they were going. The goddess smiled, saying she had missed him, and asked how he was doing. He immediately told her to shut up. Then, noticing that she was stepping on his friend's scarf, he politely asked her to get her filthy paws off of it. She claimed it was an accident. The protagonist then launched an attack at the monster, so powerful that it caused a crack in the planet itself. Yet, the creature remained standing. The goddess introduced him as her son. Urakan struck the protagonist directly, but his abilities healed him as if nothing had happened. The protagonist was still trying to process how a monster had taken his attack unscathed. The creature simply remarked that it wasn't a big deal, he just needed to dodge the attacks. He then stated that the protagonist would never land a proper hit on him with that kind of attack. The protagonist acknowledged that the monster was fast and decided to increase his power. The creature scoffed, saying he wasn't intimidated and asked if he was trying to claim he hadn't been using his full potential. The protagonist confirmed that all of his previous attacks had been normal strikes. Then, he activated every sword skill he had acquired so far, declaring that, for the first time, he was going to use an actual skill. He warned the monster that this was going to hurt, and advised him to do his best to dodge. With his skill activated, he sped up his attacks. As he remembered the moments he had shared with his friend, his power became so intense that it destroyed a neighboring planet. Hawkeye started a live stream inside the game. As soon as he introduced himself, the viewers immediately began mocking him for his previous failures as a guild commander. The game had a messaging system that was available to all players. Anyone who logged in could use it. Ignoring the mockery, he got straight to the point. He asked his viewers if they thought a 1 versus 3 million fight was possible. The chat exploded with people asking if he had seen the developer's statement about the issue. He confirmed that he had, but questioned why they should believe them. Then, he began to expose them, claiming that the devs only saw players as a source of money. To support his argument, he showed the forum complaints about the overpowered monster that had been slaughtering players. He then declared that he was going to hunt down that monster, to expose the developers. Even after the protagonist's massive attack, the creature was still alive, but this time, it wasn't unharmed. The protagonist demanded to know who it was, and the creature finally admitted that it was the lost head of Urus, the one who would eliminate all humans. Urus warned the protagonist to be careful, believing that this monster was responsible for the disappearance of all the in-game creatures. Then, he mentioned something about the protagonist's friend, confirming that her character had been deleted. As the monster lunged at him, the protagonist simply raised a wooden stick in its direction and managed to block the attack, sending it flying. Hawkeye finally found the monster and sprinted toward it. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued pummeling it with his wooden stick, dealing irreversible damage. As the fight came into view, the livestream viewers realized that a battle was already taking place. Upon seeing the protagonist, Hawkeye instantly remembered that day. He drew his bow, ready to take his revenge. But this time, the monster had already fallen. As the monster took more hits, its stats kept dropping. Its level, once an overwhelming 999, had now fallen to 723. The protagonist asked what was happening to the monster. Just moments ago, it had been flying all over the map, dodging his attacks effortlessly, but now it was getting slower. Urus explained that the energy it had stolen was returning to its rightful owners, and revealed the creature's ability. It could steal energy by killing a player and absorbing their power. Realizing that defeating the monster would bring his friend back, the protagonist became even more determined. The creature, enraged, lunged at him once again. In response, the protagonist activated another skill, 1,000,000 strikes, and unleashed it upon the monster. Its level kept dropping rapidly, and the viewers of the live stream began cheering for the protagonist, saying that thanks to him, they could finally play again. Among those watching was an idol, glued to her phone the entire time. Seeing the protagonist fight like that, she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Uraken's level plummeted to 180. He was practically finished. The protagonist suggested ending things right there. But in a final act of desperation, the monster lashed out with its tentacle, slicing him in half and absorbing all of his stats. The protagonist's absorbed cells reformed, allowing him to reclaim all of his stolen life energy. Not only that, but he also drained the monster's remaining power, unlocking its secret ability, Voracity, which granted him the power to absorb energy and stats from enemies. The goddess of life had been watching the battle the entire time. She sighed, saying that this wasn't the path she had expected him to take, but at least it had been an interesting fight. The protagonist scoffed, pointing out that she seemed awfully happy to see her own son die, then insulted her by calling her a cockroach. She casually brushed it off, claiming that her speech had just been a scripted act. Then, she asked if he seriously thought she would ever give birth to something like that. Raising her staff, she smirked and told him it was a secret. Then, she swung it, opening a dimensional rift. From within, a grotesque creature emerged. She waved goodbye and stepped through the portal, disappearing. With all the players finally back in their bodies, they celebrated their return to the game. The protagonist was welcomed into the village, hailed as their brave warrior. He took the chance to show off a little, boasting that he hadn't expected these people to finally recognize just how powerful he was. The livestream had hit 234,852 viewers, becoming one of the biggest viral moments in gaming communities, and even trending on YouTube. But then, an unknown player spoke up, questioning if everyone had already forgotten how insane the protagonist was. How could they hail him as a hero after he had killed millions of players? Hawk stepped in, shutting him down. He then turned to the protagonist, saying it was an honor to meet him, and asked if they hadn't crossed paths before. Without wasting time, Hawk made an offer. "Want to join my guild?" At that moment, everyone present suddenly realized the protagonist wasn't part of a group. Instantly, everyone started calling out to him, bombarding him with invitations. As he ran, he suddenly slammed his head into something that wasn't there before. He staggered back, looking up, only to find a massive golden statue of himself, perfectly sculpted. Both he and Urus stared in shock. Then, someone spoke up. "So, do you like the surprise?" Turning around, he found himself face to face with that old guild of billionaires, except now, they were all dressed just like him. Mr. Wang, the guild master, congratulated him on his achievement, claiming that he had known who he was all along. Ever since their first meeting, he had been so inspired by the protagonist that he had a statue built in his honor. The protagonist was shocked to see that the statue had been created from scratch in such a short time, and asked where all their expensive items had gone. The idol sat in her room, deep in thought. She told herself that she had always known, something was off about this whole situation. Too many strange things had happened in such a short time. The time when the monsters they hid vanished in the blink of an eye, the time he defeated a rabbit monster with a single strike, and even when the Hallis and guild members stole her gloves, only for them to reappear out of nowhere. She questioned why he did that, why he pretended to be weak in front of her, why he had lied to her. Memories of past traumas flooded her mind. She could never forgive people who lied to her. Things in the village had finally calmed down. The protagonist could finally breathe without people crowding around him, and he wondered if this was what being a celebrity felt like. That was when his friend appeared before him. He told her he knew he had forgotten something, and had noticed she wasn't around earlier. He then said he had something for her, and took the scarf from his cloak, wrapping it around her neck. She gave him a strange look, and then asked why he was lying to her so much. The protagonist tried to play dumb, claiming he had never lied. She then asked if he was the guy who had moved into the apartment next door. That was when he realized who she was. When he asked her, she replied that she was Sarung Han. Her manager was furious that she had revealed her identity, and asked if she had any idea what kind of trouble she could have gotten herself into. Her name was trending on the internet at that very moment. She then added that she had also seen her customize her in-game character to look exactly like herself, and asked if there was something wrong with the little pair inside her head, brain. She went on to say that she could have at least changed her hairstyle, and admitted that she was surprised people hadn't figured it out sooner. The idol defended herself, saying she didn't care if people found out who she was. She had never tried to hide it in the first place. She then questioned her manager, asking what was so wrong about playing games, and why she had to hide her identity. She confessed that she played for fun and didn't see why she should care what other people thought about it. The manager responded that she was only worried about fans discovering that her extremely sweet personality in interviews wasn't real. The idol defended herself, saying she never wanted to act that way. It was her manager who had forced her to. She had never wanted to lie to her fans. And with that, she locked herself in her room. As she logged back into the game, a childhood memory surfaced in her mind. She had been performing a song for her classmates. From a young age, she had shown great talent in music. By the time she was 5, she had already entered the industry. She was known as a prodigy, with people claiming her voice was like that of an angel. They said she was born to sing. However, she had abusive parents who only cared about money. She was constantly exploited by them, attending every kind of festival, interview, and even filming commercials as a child. Such a schedule would have been overwhelming even for an adult. They always forced her to push past her limits, despite still being a child. That was when her health problems began to manifest due to the abuse. When she collapsed during a performance, she called out for her parents, but they, feeling embarrassed by the situation, abandoned her there. Inside the game, she was recalling the moment the protagonist had given her the scarf. Then, she was caught off guard by the sound of his voice, saying that he had finally found her. The protagonist said he knew she would be there, and asked why she had run away like that. She told him to leave. He whispered to Uris, asking what was wrong with her. Uris replied that he thought she was mad at him, but wasn't sure why. The little monster then commented that he clearly knew nothing about women, explaining that she was angry because he had lied to her and hidden his powers. The protagonist then asked what he should do. Uris simply told him to apologize. The protagonist looked embarrassed but eventually apologized, admitting that he hadn't intended to lie to her at first, but things had somehow ended up that way. He had wanted to tell her eventually, but could never find the right moment. She then asked if he really thought an apology would be enough, claiming that he didn't even understand the meaning of the word. As he tried to explain himself, he was interrupted when a mysterious monster suddenly kidnapped her. A mysterious figure was riding atop the monster. He asked if he had grabbed her too tightly, saying that he hadn't meant to hurt her like that. Uris recognized him. The protagonist demanded to know who he was, and told him to come down. The man apologized to the brave warrior, claiming that someone wanted to meet her, and that he was simply taking her to that person. Uris tried to warn the protagonist not to use his strongest attack on him, but it was too late. He had already swung his stick. The man activated a skill called 8 Mirrors, reflecting the attack back at the protagonist. He lost an arm from the counterattack, but his regeneration ability immediately restored it. Urus then revealed that he knew this man. It was Habak. He added that they were of the same kind. The protagonist jokingly asked if that meant he was also a weakling. A talisman Habak carried developed a crack. He was surprised and realized that the protagonist was truly powerful. He was the first to break it after that person had done so before. Even so, he remarked that the protagonist was still just a human and had no right to possess a fragment of a god. With that, he left with her. When she woke up, she was inside an unfamiliar cell. She panicked at the situation and backed away from him, asking who he was and where she was. As she caught sight of them, she immediately recognized them. It was her parents. After the day she had collapsed during her performance, she took a break from her singing career. However, there were two people who didn't take this well. Her parents refused to accept that she would give up singing and would beat her to force her to return, always claiming they did it because they loved her. Many years passed, and her fame faded away. This caused her parents to cross the line, placing a price on her body for a group of men. Thankfully, she managed to escape from the place where she was held captive and went straight to the police to report them. The court issued a restraining order preventing her parents from coming near her. They tried to appeal, but were unsuccessful. Thanks to the protection of the law, she was finally free from them, but she was still shattered inside, deeply traumatized. She carried many traumas, especially one related to lies. After everything, she refused to leave her room. During this time, she found refuge in online games. After spending all her time in a dark room, her eyesight deteriorated, and she started wearing glasses. Because of her painful past, even to this day, she feels anxious when taking off her glasses. The reason she finally returned to the real world happened shortly after her current manager found her in the game. Seeing her parents in front of her made her tremble, and she quickly reminded them that they had a restraining order against them. He defended himself, saying they were in a game now, and had come there after seeing her play. They couldn't find her on their own, and it was thanks to the man who brought them there. He then left, saying he would leave them alone, disconnecting from the game. The first person to speak was her mother, who said that she had grown a lot, and that the only way she could see her was on television. She expressed gratitude for finally being able to see her through a virtual reality world. She questioned how they could separate a child from her parents in such a cruel way. The idol then asked what they wanted from her, stating that if they didn't have a good reason, she would leave immediately. Her mother then apologized. She confessed that she had wanted to apologize all this time, admitting they had been too harsh with her. She asked if she could find it in her heart to forgive them, claiming that she just wanted to have a happy family again. Habak was outside when he saw the protagonist approaching. He commented that this place was unknown to others, and assumed it was probably Urus who had guided him there. The protagonist interrupted, saying he was back for round 2 and confessed that he was the kind of person who needed to return the same pain his enemy had caused him. Then, he initiated a fight. The creature multiplied into 2, and then into dozens. This ability was called Mirror Clones. All the creatures charged at the protagonist, who used his stick to defend himself, vaporizing one of them. That was when Urus warned him to be careful of the special mirror ability. There were a total of 8 variations, each with a different effect. He revealed that the creature was not a player, but a boss that required a specific strategy to be defeated. While they were talking, one of the monsters attacked him from behind, and soon all of them joined in, shooting fireballs at him. The protagonist, irritated by the scare he just had, decided to use his ability called 1,000,000 hits, defeating all the clones. However, no matter how many he killed, the mirror's power continued to produce more clones. He then resolved to try breaking the mirror itself, launching an immense amount of attacks incessantly, causing the mirror to crack again. As he noticed that his enemy had let his guard down, he charged at him, taunting him as weak. The enemy defended himself, claiming he wasn't weak, but that the protagonist was incredibly powerful. The protagonist demanded that he answer if he didn't want to die and asked why he had kidnapped his friend, as well as what the fragment of God he had previously mentioned was. The enemy hesitated, unsure if he should respond. The protagonist told him he should be dead for taking such a beating. The enemy replied that his mirror was nearly broken, but it seemed he could still use it one last time. He then created a clone of the protagonist. The protagonist was shocked to see an exact copy of himself. This was an ability called Mirror of Clones, which created an exact replica of the target with a mirrored appearance. The copy then launched an attack at the protagonist with its stick, hitting him directly and depleting his health bar completely, indicating he had been defeated. Upon seeing the attack's result, Havoc admitted he should have made clones of himself instead of the monster before. Urus then asked what his objective was there. Havoc apologized for not having much time to greet him, and remarked that he looked much cuter than before. Urus interrupted him, insisting he answer the question and also asking why he had suddenly decided to show himself, questioning if it was an order from them. Havoc replied, asking if he could at least pinch Urus's cheeks once. Their conversation was interrupted by a mass that suddenly appeared on the ground. This mass of flesh was the protagonist's body regenerating. Due to his ability, his adversary was shocked to see his grotesque regenerative form. His clone, upon seeing him, launched another attack, which the protagonist parried with his stick, causing a massive explosion. Since neither of them was hurt, they charged at each other, and the battle grew intense, full of destruction and explosions. The attacks seemed infinite, yet they fought tirelessly. No matter how many blows were exchanged, the other always had one more. Finally, after many powers were used against one another, they were both destroyed, activating their regeneration abilities and bringing them back to normal. They then started the duel again, launching themselves toward each other. Urus continued to insist that Havoc answer his question, again asking why he had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and why he had kidnapped the girl. Havoc finally replied that he would be completely lost about that, and suggested Urus pay more attention to the people around him for once. He claimed that none of them could defeat him, as he was the strongest monster in the entire game, the Great Urus. He then posed a question to Urus, reminding him that previously he hadn't cared about any humans in that world. He questioned how and why he had suddenly become attached to a mere human, asking for the reason behind the question and stating that he could guess just by looking at what was happening around them. He goes on to say that he believed there were still some misunderstandings between them, but there was no need to worry about it, at least not yet, as he wasn't interested in the warrior who had become his friend. His only goal there was the fragment of God. Urus asked if he was referring to love. Havoc began to laugh at this response, questioning what he meant, and if he really thought she was the fragment of God, wondering if he genuinely believed an ordinary human like her could be that valuable. He then confessed that she was actually just the person who possessed the fragment. It was revealed that her gloves were the fragment, likely the reason her parents were after her. Urus questioned if those expensive gloves she carried were the fragment, to which Havoc replied that the price didn't matter. For most regular players, the price indicated the item's value and functionality. However, in that game, items were divided into various classes. The lowest rank was called normal, improving with rare items, then unique items, and finally mythical items. Above these, there supposedly existed an ascending classification, but they had never seen one in their lives. The protagonist's fight against his clone continued, but this time he left an opening and was attacked by his opponent. Their stats and skill controls were exactly the same, making the battle very intense. It was a fight between a player and a robot, and in that game, a robot had an advantage. Upon realizing this, Urus ran toward the protagonist, asking if he was okay. His regeneration ability activated, allowing him to recover again. It was the first time he was having so much fun, shocking everyone with what he said. Until now, he had been very bored with battles against enemies that died in just one attack. He confessed he didn't want to kill that clone yet. He wanted to continue fighting him. Urus warned that he was now in danger, but the protagonist said he had already figured out 2 ways to defeat his copy, leaving everyone surprised. And that was the story for today. Did you enjoy it? Then leave a like, and let me know in the comments what stories you want to see next. I'm always keeping an eye on the comments and bringing the best stories, so don't forget to subscribe and share with friends who also love manhwas. See you in the next video.